That was I Got a Feeling by the Black Eyed Peas, and I've got a feeling this next segment is going to be a cracker. Our next guest has been involved in sports media since he was a young lad. He started as a casual at the Geelong Advertiser while still at school. Last week, I believe he was strutting his stuff in Adelaide for the Gather Round, and now he has reached the absolute pinnacle of his career by joining Fazman and I on Talking Sport this afternoon. It's my great pleasure to welcome to our show Mitch Cleary.
How you going there, Mitch?
Good evening, guys. Thanks for having me on board. What an honour. And I can't believe Faz has picked me before his own niece, Ariane Titmus, to join the show. So I seriously sit here incredibly humbled to be a part of the program.
That's very kind there, Mitch. Great to chat to you. We met briefly a few years ago when I was sitting down at a table at the Royal Bar down in East Perth, and I was chatting to a mate about a couple of topics other than AFL, and then I turned to the left and there was a fella by the name of Mitch Cleary. I didn't know what he looked like, but I could hear his voice and I could hear how passionate and very professional he was about a football conversation. And then I found out he was talking to a fella by the name of Ben Cameron, who happened to be a radio football announcer over here in Perth. Well, I had a great little chat to them and been able to keep in touch just briefly with Mitch over the years with a few little texts. And Mitch, great to have you on, and thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, lucky we weren't running a record on that night, Faz. It would have been interesting listening back. I love my time in Perth. Absolutely adore the city. Who knows, in a few years, it could be the next venue for Gather Round. They might have missed a beat, not sort of going harder for that originally from Adelaide. That was an awesome week last weekend. And, no, it's great to keep in touch with yourself that night. Benny Cameron, myself, yourself, went into the wee hours of the morning, but that's what off-season holidays are for.
Mitch, there was plenty to talk about. That's why we had to have a couple of extra beers that night. But I've obviously seen your career, Mitch. At the time, you were working for AFL.com, probably working very closely there with Mr. Barrett. And then you've made the switch over to Channel 7 Melbourne, and you're one of the main reporters there for the AFL, and you're now involved with Friday night footy on the panel there after the game, and during the game at half time they'll have crosses with you. So you must be loving the new role you've got at Channel 7.
Yeah, it's an amazing mix, and I'm incredibly grateful for the opportunity that Channel 7 have given me. It's a good mix of reporting during the week, going out to all the clubs. It's still crazy to think there's 10 Victorian clubs, and you do your best each week to keep abreast of their movements. And then on the weekend, get to be part of the broadcast team for the footy on the screens of 7 all across the country. So, incredibly grateful for the opportunity. And you have to pinch yourself sometimes that you get paid to talk about footy like you and I were a number of years ago at the pub.
That's right. Now, we do know, and you're quite open about the fact that you are from Geelong and you're a Geelong supporter. Even though you're a reporter, you can't be biased, but you do still have an interest and a love for Geelong. You do realise that you're talking to two Richmond supporters at the moment. SD and I are originally from Tassie before we moved over here to Perth, and we're Tiger supporters. We've obviously had some good success over the last 5 or 6 years, but the Tigers, they're not going so well at the moment, are they?
No, geez, one Tigers fan was enough. I didn't realise SD was a Tigers fan as well, so I've drawn the short straw there. They've sort of hit a bit of a flat spot at the moment, and I think you could make a case that across the whole competition that Tom Lynch, there's probably no player more integral to their own team than Tom Lynch and what he does for Richmond. Jack Revolt, probably into his last year, back-to-back weeks, he's kicked 4 goals, so he's holding up his end of the bargain. But, there's probably no more important player to their side than Tom Lynch. I just think a few of their stars are down. Like Jacob Hopper probably hasn't had the impact that he would have loved coming across from Richmond. Shea Bolton signed that big deal at the end of last year. He probably hasn't returned to the heights of his All-Australian year. And then this week you look at the team. They get Ivan Soldo back to carry the ruck. That's a big in. Nathan Broad's back from suspension. But Dion Prestia, with his soft tissue concerns, has been rested given their 6-day break, and they've got a few back-to-back short breaks coming up. So, yeah, a big watch at the Tigers. And I think the next fortnight or two is probably make or break to see where their season falls from here.
You must be pretty happy, though, with Geelong's efforts on the weekend.
Yeah, they were impressive, weren't they? And who can stop Jeremy Cameron and Tom Hawkins right now? I think Hawkins had a bit of a quieter start to the year, SD, given his foot troubles that he had over pre-season. Basically was plucked from basically the training track with not much fitness under his belt to play round one. And he's almost been doing a mini pre-season over the first month of the season, but he's starting to hit his straps. Jeremy Cameron's the best footballer in the land right now. I don't think you can make much dispute from that, apart from maybe Marcus Bontempelli, but Jeremy Cameron is a joy to watch. Paddy Dangerfield's just starting to get back into a bit of form, and their backline led by Tom Stewart continues to do wonders. So if that's a hint to what can go on at Geelong, what we saw in the middle parts of that game against Sydney, watch out the rest of the competition, starting with Essendon on Sunday in the country game at the G.
Now, Mitch, there's always a big hype for the Anzac Day games. The Anzac Day Eve, Richmond versus Melbourne, is obviously a big occasion. But the big one, the Anzac Day game at the MCG on Anzac Day, Collingwood versus Essendon. It was an amazing game. You would have loved being part of that for Channel 7, and it was a huge crowd, but the comeback from Collingwood in the last quarter to steal that one, it just shows McRae has his team playing four quarters, and he likes to win the close ones.
What a footy club they are right now. There's probably no more watchable team than Collingwood, and let's be honest, they're probably a ratings dream right now, because even no matter how far they're down at three-quarter time, it was 28 points on the weekend on Anzac Day, and they're able to come back and turn that around. Nick Dacos, there's plenty of debate right now. Does he get enough hardball? How much of an impact does he actually make? Well, he had 40 touches on the weekend and kicked 2 goals in the last quarter when the game was on the line. He is an extraordinary player. And it was funny chatting to Craig McRae post-game. This is a guy that won 3 flags playing for Brisbane in the early 2000s. He's played in front of big crowds at the G, and he said he's never heard a louder roar than the roar that the MCG produced after the national anthem, after the last post on Tuesday at the MCG. That was phenomenal. And when the Collingwood Army get their tail up, there's something else. I truly think they add another, 19th man to that team. And the belief they'll get from doing that on the big stage will do wonders for this team. And, you look coming into finals, what they can do from that game, there's not many other clubs. Your Richmond is probably up there. You can throw Carlton maybe into the mix, but having that experience of being able to perform in front of big crowds, not many other clubs get to taste that, and I think that really can add some belief going into finals that they know they can do it when it matters on the big stage.
Yeah, well, Mitch, there's a big topic circling all the media at the moment, whether it's politics or the AFL, and that is that there's a big chance that Albanese might announce that he's going to provide the $240 million required for the AFL stadium down in Tasmania if Tasmania are granted the 19th licence for the AFL. Is that what you're hearing?
Yeah, it's in the diary. Hopefully we can head down there on Saturday and consider whether Anthony Albanese will tick off the final part of the budget to give Tasmania their own stadium, which in turn should allow the AFL to tick off a 19th licence. Gil McLaughlin's been so strong that you're not getting a team, Tassie, unless you can prove to us that you're going to build a new state-of-the-art stadium. It's going to be around the mid-20,000s, but if that is approved, as we expect this weekend by Anthony Albanese as the final part of the funding, you think the AFL would be a fait accompli to approve a 19th team. And what a move it would be for Tasmania. They've been crying out for their own team for a number of years, or decades even. And I don't think there'll be any question on whether they'll be able to fill that. Look what the Jack Jumpers have done in the NBL, filling out 6,000-7,000 of their home ground. Mid-20s in a state-of-the-art facility, potentially with a roof. They'll do that with their eyes closed down there in Tasmania. So it'll be an extraordinary move for the footy. The next question will be who will be the coach, who will be their star signing. It's going to give us plenty to talk about. But no, I can't wait to see Tassie come into the competition. And already the debate's going. You know, James Sicily, the captain of Hawthorn, the Hawks receive millions of dollars from the Tassie government each year as part of the promotional spending. He's come out and said that, you know, there'd be a knock or a question on whether young guys my age would want to stay and live in Tasmania. Well, hasn't that lit a fuse under the Tasmanian public? You know, Tim Payne's come out and had his crack, Jeremy Rockcliffe, Matthew Wade. So if there's one thing that's going to galvanise the Tassie community, it's something like that. And it's been great to see over the last 24 hours.
Yeah, well, I had a little stint down there in Tassie, down in Hobart for about 5 years before returning to Perth. And look, Hobart's a great city. Yes, it's smaller. It's not a Melbourne. It's not a Sydney. It's not an Adelaide or Perth. But, you know, they're very parochial. They're passionate about their sport, but they'll back their own team. There's no doubt that they'll see bigger crowds than what they get for Hawthorn or North Melbourne games. And it'll be fantastic for Tassie. Now, who do you think would be a great signing, a marquee player like Ablett did when he went up to Gold Coast?
That's a great question. I was looking at it in the office today, like guys that are in their, you know, early 20s. Like imagine a Bailey Smith. He's about 21, 22. Again, I'm not saying that he's going to be the guy, but if you could draw right now a perfect mix, could you imagine a Bailey Smith or like a Sam Walsh going down there in 4 or 5 years? And then you look at the coaches, like imagine Nathan Buckley going down to start a Tassie team, or a Damien Hardwick. I'm not trying to pull him out of Richmond, but you know, in 4 years, his time might have run at Punt Road. It might even come sooner. Who knows? So they'll have a blank canvas. And I think what will be important for Tassie is they'll take learnings out of what happened with the Giants and the Suns, that they won't want to make the same mistakes. You know, they want the facilities cherry ripe, ready to go at the start. They want the right mix of young talent and senior guys. I think the Suns made a bit of a meal of that at the start. So, no, how good, another team coming into footy. And then I guess, guys, the next question is, what happens with the 20th team? Because if you get 19, you're going to want probably a 20th team to make it 10 games each weekend. You know, is that Darwin? Is that a third team in WA or even SA? The debate will go quickly from there. So it's always fun to watch.
Do you think that debate could possibly include a reduction in the number of teams? So perhaps going back down to an 18-team side and having two teams merge?
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't rule it out. I think what the AFL love, though, is the chance to be able to sell another game. So, you know, the current broadcast deal is 9 games. If they can add a bit more revenue to their coffers and have the ability to sell a 10th game. I didn't mind the suggestion from Chris Scott, the Geelong coach today, guys, saying that currently the list of AFL players is 42, 43 across the competition. Could you scale that back to, you know, like let's say 38? So if you take 4 players out of every list right now, that's, you know, close to 75, 80 players across the competition. That could be enough to add 2 more teams. So they're the sort of things that clubs or the AFL will look at. Could they, you know, the talent pool is obviously, you know, thinning out at the moment. Could you potentially trim back, you know, 10% of each list at the moment and add that, you know, that surplus of players across 2 new teams? That's something that they'll have to consider, but it's all up for debate at the moment.
Now, Mitch, obviously we're over here in WA, 2 AFL teams. The West Coast Eagles have been depleted with injuries, and they're really going through a rebuilding stage with a lot of their senior players coming to the end. What's your take? Do you think that they should have cleaned out a few a year earlier?
It's interesting, though, because you look at Collingwood right now, they've got Steele, Sidebottom and Scott Pendlebury both performing in a team that's probably the best team in the comp, along with Geelong right now at Collingwood. And, you know, you could have made an argument 3 or 4 years ago when Collingwood hit a bit of a trough that they should have been, you know, shipped off for draft picks. So, yeah, you could argue that maybe a few of those Eagles guys could be served off elsewhere. I just think, you know, the thing that stands out to me is the Tim Kelly trade. They gave up 2 really high-end picks for him at the time, and that could be, you know, 21, 22-year-olds right now that would be performing in your team. And Tim Kelly's been okay. Like, he's probably the Eagles' most important midfielder still at the moment, but, you know, the decisions around the list probably haven't been, in hindsight, I know hindsight's 2020 when it comes to footy decisions, probably haven't been there. So give them a bit of time. You know, they've still got a few senior guys. They've just got to nail these draft picks going forward and maybe look at a few clubs on the East Coast, like a Devon Robertson at Brisbane, who's not getting a game? Could he come in and make an impact? Could they try and entice a Tim English or an Aaron Norton, WA boys, out of the Bulldogs? I think they're decisions they'll need to make, but they do need to get their drafting right, because that's the most important thing right now. Their injury list is just off the charts. I'd love them to be a bit more transparent. They admitted that they pulled the wool over the fans' eyes with Nick Nat-Nui at the start of the year. I'd love to be a bit more transparent on what's actually going on with their injuries at the moment.
Well, moving along from the West Coast Eagles, the other side of town, down there in Fremantle, they're not performing that well. What do you think's the problem down there at Freo?
Yeah, I think what's probably been underrated a bit, I know that all the beer was brought in last week, the Lobster Tears beer around Rory Lobb returning to play against Fremantle, but he's probably an underrated loss right now. He was their leading goal kicker last year. He was a bit of a focal point up there in attack for them. And with Matt Taberner out injured, Luke Jackson hasn't hit his straps yet. Michael Walters is another year older. Nat Fife's injured. I think their focal points in attack have just been missing at the moment. And Rory Lobb, fans, he was probably a bit maligned at the Dockers, but he's probably been a bit of an underrated loss right now. And their midfield, Sarong's been good, but Brayshaw's been, it looks like he's playing a little bit sore at the moment. They haven't got, goals out of their midfield. So, there's, I think, just forward of centre in their forward 50 has been a bit of a concern right now.
Yeah, so if they were to recruit some players at the end of the season, what sort of player do you think the Freo Dockers need?
Oh, gee, I'd love, as a Dockers fan, just to put a big bustling key forward in that side right now. And an Aaron Norton, if you had a blank check and you could pick any player, like a WA guy like Aaron Norton, to put in that side, even like a Jacob Van Rooyen at Melbourne, a big focal point, because Jackson's going to be there, but he's going to be a bit more of a ruck forward. Sam Sturt's there, Jai Miss is still coming on a bit. I think they need a big key forward, a big focal point. That'll be my wish list for the Dockers. I think their defence is pretty well sorted. You've got Pearce and Brennan Cox. Luke Ryan's an All-Australian. He's a star. So I think a big focal point in attack would be something that I'd have right at the top of my whiteboard for the Dockers.
Now, SD, being Tiger supporters, we like to get a scoop on whether there's some rumblings of new players that might come to our list next year. I was reading a little article last week, and I'm pretty sure it had Mitch Cleary's name written all over it, that he thinks there's a potential player from the Western Sydney that could be on the radar for the Tigers. Any truth to that, Mitch?
Yeah, it's a bit of a watch this space, Faz. So Harry Himmelberg is out of contract right now. He's a free agent. So right now you don't have to give up anything for him, given he's a free agent. So you can go to him and give him a contract and not have to give up a single draft pick. Because don't forget, Richmond gave up all their picks for this year's draft last year for Taranto and Hopper. I think the free agents will be a one to watch for the Tigers. The other factor as part of Harry Himmelberg, he's best mates with Tim Taranto. And clubs like pairing up mates. Imagine Taranto putting it down the throat of Harry Himmelberg. So he's a bit of a watch. I think if I was drawing a whiteboard up for the Tigers, I think their midfield is pretty settled. Revolt's probably going to retire. Grimes probably only a year or two. You've got Bolter and Lynch. I think one more key back or key forward, and Harry Himmelberg can do both, would be my on my wish list right now if I was a Tigers fan like yourself.
Well, being a AFL follower, we always try to be like an assistant coach or a team selector, SD, just behind the scenes. And I was wondering, Mitch, when Josh Gibcus comes back for Richmond, is there a chance that they could swing him forward and sort of fill that void of Tom Lynch so that Rewalt's got another tall down there just until Tom Lynch comes back, do you think?
Yeah, I forgot about him. Geez, he's been out and been in the abyss for a little while. Yeah, I wouldn't rule that out. I think he might have spent a little bit of time forward as a junior, spent most of his time in defence, but I don't mind that. Assistant Paul Farrelly, just pulling the magnets together for Damien Hardwick. I think he looked good in a Richmond polo phase in the Tigers coach's box.
Well, you can drop that one for Channel 7, Mitch. I'll let you have that one.
All right, thanks for that. I might bring them out. I need to lead the sport break tomorrow with that one.
Yeah, well, there's obviously another big topic, and that is that the AFL CEO position could be filled. And you worked at the AFL when you were working for AFL.com, so you'd know a lot of the management and the structure and the setup. So what's your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think Andrew Dillon is right now in front of that queue to replace Gil McLaughlin, unless the Commission can have a late switch and convince Gil to stay. I think that's still unlikely. So right now, Andrew Dillon is leading that race. The other contenders, Travis Auld and Kylie Watson-Wheeler, have been told that they're out of the race. That's my understanding, that they're out of the race. So Andrew Dillon would be the next replacement. One to watch is Brendan Gale. So he's a Tasmanian, obviously Richmond CEO. Not trying to get him out of Richmond, but there is a suggestion from some clubs that he might go to the AFL in a beefed-up role, sort of under the CEOs, like a 2IC, and sort of run football operations, but also oversee Tassie, his introduction into the AFL. So Brendan Gale has obviously got a strong passion for Tassie coming from the state. That could be a bit of a signing for the AFL to get Brendan Gale across. Watch this space on that one.
Well, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Oh, there we go.
Talking of moving into different roles, Alistair Clarkson's moved back into coaching at North Melbourne. He had a big push for the Tassie bid. Do you think there'd be any chance that he could be involved with Tassie down the line, or do you think his alliances now are back with North, the club that he played for, and his focus is just with the Kangaroos?
I wouldn't rule it out. Definitely wouldn't rule it out. Since COVID, I've learnt one thing in footy, and you're never surprised by anything right now. And if Alistair Clarkson was to join the Tasmanian team, that would not shock me in the slightest. He's got a 5-year deal at North Melbourne, so if he was true to that contract, that would mean he'd be available in 2028. But don't forget what happened at Hawthorn. He left his contract there a year early. So watch this space. Maybe you could be onto something. But no, there'd be no bigger name than Tasmania. And he was part of the original push from the government. He was paid by the government last year in an advisory role to sort of, push their bid along. Spent some time in the States, sort of getting a bit of a fact-finding mission and sort of, passing on his wisdom to the Tassie government. So he's been part of it. I'm sure he'd love to one day finish off his hard work and have some sort of role with Tasmania.
Yeah, well, he was very, very passionate about it. He was obviously going over to America and just getting a feel for some of the franchises over there in smaller population regions. And he was obviously very influential in the AFL now, looking like giving that the tick. So good on Alistair, and it's great to see other Tasmanians like Nick Rewald, who was heavily involved with it, getting behind. And I think Brendan Gale gave it a pretty big tick as well, being an ex-Tassie player. But Mitch, I'd love to ask you, and I've never asked you this the night that we had a couple of beers down at the pub, who's your greatest interview that you've had?
Gee whiz, that's a very good question.
Oh, excluding us, of course.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, we hadn't. I hadn't been interviewed by you guys when we met at the pub, so I should rule that out. That's a good question. Well, just last week I spoke to Taran Thomas, and he's been, he was stood down by North Melbourne. That was interesting to hear from his side of things. So that's a more recent example. Maybe next time I come on, I'll have a bit of a think and I'll come back to you on that one.
Yeah, well, talking to Taran Thomas, that's interesting because part of our radio station, IPL Radio, it stands for Inspiring Passionate Lives, and we support people out in the community. It's all about mental health awareness, and obviously he's gone through some tough times recently, and we wish people like that all the best in getting back into what they're doing, either in career or just in society. And we certainly, wish people like Taran Thomas all the best and hope he can get back to himself and get back to playing great footy again.
Yeah, hopefully he can get his off-field stuff sorted. He's been through, quite a few misdemeanors off-field. He's been brought in and been asked to explain his actions. I think the competition's better when Taran Thomas is up and running, but he does need to sort himself out off-field before he's any chance to return to the AFL field. He's a Tasmanian.
Could play for the Tassie, Napa Tassie, or the Tassie Devils that they might be. You think getting back home close to his family?
Wouldn't rule that out. He's got some family in Sydney as well. Wouldn't rule that out. Being down in Tassie, it is a long way away, and who knows if he continues to, his career, you could still argue, still is on a knife's edge. So it's in his hands whether he wants to take it upon himself, get his professionalism back to a standard to play AFL footy, and who knows what's happening with Taron Thomas in 4 years from now.
Well, Mitch, I know you're a very busy man, so we really appreciate you giving us the time tonight. You've probably just come off Channel 7 News, and you've been able to have a great chat with us and for our listeners that are right into their AFL, and to have someone like you with a fantastic career in the sports media. We really appreciate you coming on. And SD, we get the big ones now, don't we?
Oh, we do. We certainly pull them in. And Mitch, I'd be interested to know who's your pick for the flag this year?
It's hard to look past Collingwood, SD, from what I saw on the weekend. What they've been able to do without a ruckman, Dan McStay, their big key forward signing from Brisbane, is injured. They were able to get over the line. That belief from that game in front of a big crowd. I'm going Collingwood right about now. Brisbane is the other smoky. I think I like them pre-season. They've had a bit of a few hiccups, but no, it's hard to resist Collingwood right about now.
Yeah, the only thing with Brisbane, they don't travel that well, do they? They're a different side when they're playing in Melbourne, but, geez, they're hard to beat up at the Gabba. And, Charlie Cameron kicked a lazy 7. He's so fast that once he gets over the back, he's hard to stop, isn't he?
Oh, he's a hard matchup, as you say. If he's on a big guy, then he'll lead up at the footy and beat you with speed. If he's on a small guy, he'll do it in the air one-on-one because he's such a good contested mark, or then he'll try and burn you out the back. So he's a triple threat, Charlie Cameron, and Jeremy Cameron's well on his way, but I wouldn't rule out a little sneaky push for Charlie Cameron to take home the Coleman if he continues his sort of form.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, Mitch, thank you very much for coming on Talking Sport. We really appreciate you giving your time. And look, we might even see if we can press the phone number in a few weeks' time. We might have a bit of a chat again if we can, and hopefully there's a bit of news about that confirmation of the Tassie licence.
Sounds good, guys, and who knows, I might see you in another East Perth pub one of these days.
I'll buy you a beer. It's probably my turn.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Mitch.
A lot, Mitch.